All right, we wind up Proverbs this morning. We're in Proverbs 31, winds up this trimester. And so the next trimester begins, should begin next week, but we have Tim Stevens with us for the singing school. He will preach, though, on Sunday at this hour and at the worship hour and at the Sunday evening hour. So we will not have class next Sunday. So your questions reflect we will be having class 2 weeks from today. And it'll be on the book of Jonah. We have some minor prophets to finish up. And so the next trimester will wind us up and get us through with what was to be a 5-year survey, but because of COVID and taking some breaks and doing some other classes, it's taken us longer. But anyway, we'll wind up at the same time on Sunday night, Sunday morning and Wednesday night. Be that as it may, we're looking at Proverbs 31 this morning. I want to review just a little bit differently than we have been for the first 9 chapters, since this is our last of the series of Proverbs. So you should be familiar with chapters 1 to 9 as it deals with what wisdom will and will not do, and wisdom has to be sought, the value of wisdom, sexual immorality and marital faithfulness, etc. And finally it ends with the wisdom's invitation and folly's her rival's invitation as well. When I say different, I'm going to give you the title. You tell me which chapter. We're in 1 to 9 now. What chapter deals with the warnings about the strange woman? Yeah, 5, 6, and 7, but particularly 7 does that. What chapter deals with wisdom must be sought? All right, chapter 2, very good. Wisdom's invitation, or invitation of wisdom and her rival folly. Which serves as a summary of chapters 1 to 9, which would make us think it's probably toward the end, which would make it the last, which would be chapter 9. Boy, we're quick. All right, good. All right. The chapter that deals with the value of wisdom. All right, yeah, chapter 3. The chapter that deals with the warnings of wisdom. Warns about various things. Chapter 6. The chapter that deals with wisdom's invitation to excellent things. Chapter 8, very good. Chapter that deals with what wisdom will and will not do. Chapter 1. And then the chapter that deals with wisdom is the principal thing. Chapter 4. And then the last, sexual immorality and marital faithfulness. If you take those numbers and see one that's missing, you ought to get this one. Chapter 5. All right. Those are the first 9 chapters. Now, what we have in chapters 1 to 9 is just a summary of what wisdom will and will not do, the invitation of wisdom, her folly, her rival folly, and then 10 to 13 has to do with various proverbs, miscellaneous proverbs. Some of those are in sections, but some of those are just miscellaneous verses that deal with various principles that we've been talking about. All right, let's go to chapter 31 now. There are 2 things that happen in chapter 31. This has to do with the words of Lemuel. We'll talk about who or what that may be, or what that may refer to. But I'm interested at this juncture with 2 thoughts. There is advice for kings, and then there is the virtuous woman. Advice for kings and the virtuous woman. Some think that these are distinct points, meaning that there is no correlation between the 2. I think there probably is a number of correlations. King develops that thought in his work, if you want to pursue that. We're not going to take the time for all of that. But in that, the warning is given concerning women in the advice for kings, verses 1 to 9. Then here is the kind of woman that would be beneficial to you. And so there is that correlation. There are other correlations that I'll forego at this time, but there is a relation between the 2. Some think that Lemuel is a pen name for Solomon. And I don't think that's the case, but some think that Solomon is the one who is the author of all of the Proverbs, basically, most of the Proverbs at least, and that what we saw in chapter 30, it may be Solomon, and Lemuel is Solomon as well. I think perhaps not. King Lemuel, we don't have any record about him in any other reference in the text that would give us an indication that he was the king of. Some think, King argues, that he probably was the king of Messa, and because of this word that is translated utterance is also translated Messa, but it's also used in Proverbs 30 as well. I'm not sure that's a strong argument. Northern Arabia is where he thinks perhaps he may have been from. A king in ancient times could be the king of a nation, but sometimes you would have a king that would be a king of a city, nothing more basically than the mayor of a large city, maybe a walled city. So if he were the king of an empire, for example, like the king of Babylon or the king of Assyria, or king of Syria, we probably would have some historical references somewhere, probably more like the king of some city for what that may be worth to us. The name simply means of God. There's no evidence that it's Solomon. We'll take it on face value that Lemuel was someone other than Solomon, and I'll leave it at that. Now, I want to look at verse 2 before we get into the flow of the context, and we'll go to our questions. The text says here at verse 2, this is the words of King Lemuel, the utterance of which his mother taught him. And so I call this the words of Lemuel and the virtuous woman. Particularly verses 1 to 9 has to do with the words of Lemuel. But this is what his mother advised him. Now you're going to see the significance of that here in just a second. But I'm interested in verse 2. Verse 2 says, "What, my son, and what, son of my womb, and what, son of my vows." Now what's interesting to me about that phraseology is there seems to be repetitive emphasis by saying, "What, my son? What?" Emphasizing the importance of what's about to be said. Some have suggested that the dangers of which she warns her son may have to do with what she is already seeing develop within him. Within his kingdom, within his city, within whatever region he reigns, there may have been great issues that need to be dealt with. But she warns him not about the issue, not about the threats of another nation, the threats of another city, the threats of an enemy. She warns him about what? Drinking and women. Yeah, she warns him about things that bring destruction to kings, women and drink. And so what's the point of verse 2 before we get to the drink and the women? It says, "What, my son, what, my son of my womb, the son of my vows." The son of my vows may be the son that she had vowed that she was going to lead in the way of the Lord, like Hannah did with reference to 1 Samuel. King argues, and I think a pretty good point, that there is an elliptical phrase here simply suggesting that it's not only calling for attention, but that the emphasis is, what is it with you? What is the matter with you? Suggesting maybe that she's already seeing this in her son. Maybe he's leaning toward loose women. Maybe he's leaning toward drinking. Maybe he's not doing the job that he should do. And so his mother advises him, "What is it with you, my son? What is it with you? What's wrong with you?" Let me give you some warnings. Does that make sense? I'll leave that to you to decide. You can read the several pages of King's evidence for yourself. All right, let's talk about the advice for kings. Before we look at that, let's go to question 1. What was the advice his mother gave him concerning kings? All right. Don't give yourself to women. Don't be a drinker of strong drinks. Anything else? Say again? Ways that destroy kings, yes. Anything else? Yes, those would have great impact upon his judgment. I'm still fishing for something else. These are all real good. Yeah, take care of those that are less fortunate. All right. So let's look at those 4 things that are dealt with in this context. The first warning is be careful concerning women. Let's look at that at verse 3. Do not give your strength to women. How could you give your strength to women? All right, exactly. Nehemiah chapter 13, that Solomon's wives made even him to sin. What does that tell you? Yeah, he gave his strength. I don't think he's talking about his physical strength. In other words, whatever strength that he had in serving the Lord, whatever resistance he had, he caved because of women. Samson caved because of a woman. He gave his strength to women. And so the warning is, don't let women destroy you. It's not saying something against women, but it's a focus on his being evil, not upon the women being evil. So don't give your strength to women. Now, we've already noted in chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, how that woman may allure him. Watch for that. Watch for those temptations. More about that perhaps in a moment. The second part of verse 3, part 3b as I've got on the screen, nor your ways to that which destroys kings. Probably broader, that's why I listed it as a separate point. What's he saying? What destroys leaders, period? Forget whether it's kings or presidents or a CEO, an elder in the church, the father in the home. What destroys leaders? Okay, sin. Object power. Pride. Okay. All right. Have a great influence. Greed. Using bad judgment. Would the phrase here being self-serving? Isn't self-serving the problem behind all sin? It's a lack of self-denial, suppressing our own will, yielding to the will of God, suppressing our own will in interest of others. He's only interested in self. How many politicians have you noted in your lifetime that they're out for themselves and they're not interested in the nation, they're not interested in the people, they're not interested in what's good for man. They're self-serving. They're trying to get reelected. They're trying to take care of themselves. Pad their own pockets, for example. That happens time and again. So don't do that which is self-serving, that which destroys kings. It might be women, that's self-serving. It might be strong drink, that's self-serving. Don't do that which brings kings down. So she's warning her son, son, listen to me. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What are you thinking? You're going seemingly in the wrong direction. Be careful of the women. Don't be self-serving. Now, 4-7, don't be given to strong drink. What does she say to him about strong drink? Kings should not drink wine. Why? As per this text. And princes should not have intoxicating drink. Verse 5. Yeah. They'll forget, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert justice of all the afflicted. What does that mean? Yeah. You can't think clear. You can't think straight. You're not going to follow the law. You're not going to be interested in doing what's right, because if you're intoxicated, then and you drink, you're not thinking in the right direction. You're not thinking clearly. I won't mention the name of the senator because he's dead, but I have a good friend who was a page to one of the senators in the 70s. And he tells me, he said, I've stood at the door of the Senate chambers watching other pages tell a senator, well-known senator, how to vote because he was so drunk he couldn't, he'd just stupor, and they tape a piece of paper to his hand. It says, vote no. You're to vote no when you go in here. Do you understand? Yeah. And push him in to go vote because he's drunk as a skunk. And that happens in our Senate chambers. It happens at the state level. It happens all across the country. Kings don't drink, shouldn't drink. All right, now verse 7. Does that encourage drinking? Let him drink and forget his poverty. Or verse 6 and 7. Give drink to him that is perishing, and wine to those who are bitter of heart, that he may forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. Is that saying drink is a good thing? All right, maybe it's encouraging for medicinal purposes. It can't be encouraging drinking because, think of other proverbs. Where would I go find another proverb about drinking, the dangers of drinking? What about Proverbs 20 and verse 1? Wine is a mocker, intoxicating drink arouses brawling. Whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Numerous passages that discourage that. I think bingo.
It's not encouraging, it's to show it what it does. A lot of people use it for escapism, but it needs to be in reality.
Yes. It is not encouraging. I think that's a good analysis. It's just stating what drink does and how people use it. It's not saying it's okay, but the one that's wanting to drown his sorrows in drink, let him do that. The king does. You as a king don't need to do that. Don't do that. Don't drown your sorrows. Let the guy that's interested, and that's not encouraging that's in poverty and wants to forget that in his misery, and he wants to remember that no more and forget all that. That's what people use it for, or abuse it for. Don't drink as a leader. Have some responsibility. Let's go further. Now, verses 8 and 9, this simply said, speak up in defense of the helpless. Now, here's another connection between this section and the next, because that virtuous woman does speak up in defense of the helpless. Verse 20. But be that as it may, verse 9. Open your mouth for the speechless. What does that suggest to you? Say again? Yeah, one can't speak for themselves. Open your mouth for the helpless, for those that are speechless, those that can't speak up and defend themselves, and the cause of all those who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the needy. In other words, be a righteous, fair, honorable, equitable judge, plead the cause of the poor, and speak up in defense of the helpless. So basically her advice is summarized in 4 points. Be careful about your relationship with women. Don't do things that are self-serving. Be interested in other people. Thirdly, watch your drink. And fourthly, speak up in defense of the helpless. So you think that's good advice? Pretty good advice. You think our leaders generally in Washington follow that advice? I don't think so. I don't think so. Questions or comments? All right, let's go to the virtuous woman now. Here's what we have with reference to the virtuous woman. We're going to see she's priceless, cares for her husband, she's a diligent worker, takes care of herself, cares for others, speaks wisdom, praised by many, and she fears God. So let's take those one by one and see what we've got. Let's go to verse 10. And the first thing that we learn about her is that indeed she's priceless. Who can find a virtuous woman? Let's define virtuous. What does it mean, a virtuous woman? Excellent. Your footnote will say excellent. If you have a footnote, it may say in the sense of all forms of excellence, a woman of valor, a worthy woman, the American Standard, a wife of noble character, the New International, A good wife, Revised Standard. An excellent woman, English Standard Version. A virtuous woman. Who can find a virtuous woman? Then it says her price is far above rubies. What does that mean? All right. It may allude to the custom of giving treasures in exchange for a wife, as a man would give that to her father in exchange for the wife. In other words, her worth cannot be priced. She's priceless. You can look to the ends of the earth and you cannot find her equal. And so the excellent wife cannot be priced. She is priceless. Make sense? She's of great value. Verse 10. All right, let's go to verse 11. Question number 2, so we'll come to each one of these verses and time. Beside each one of the verses listed below, you're to list the qualities that make her a virtuous woman. So, verse 11, what did you see? All right. Husband has trust in her. She cares about her husband. She takes care of him. What else? Anything else? All right, she takes care of her household. Let's look at 3 verses here, 11 and 12, and I'll jump down to verse 23. She cares for her husband. Look at verse 11. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, and she will have no lack of gain. In other words, her husband has full confidence in her because she is that excellent wife. When she leaves home, she's going to act discreetly. She's going to promote his cause. He can trust her in his absence. What does it mean? She shall have no need, no lack of gain. King James says no need of spoil. Yes, she will greatly enrich his life. Pulpit says she will not lack gain, which is what the New King James says. In other words, she has no need for more spoil because she manages the affairs of her husband and the household well. And so the idea of spoils is that she needs more. So she's wasted this and then she needs more. No. She doesn't do that. She doesn't have need for more because she manages things well. She's caring about her husband and the things of her husband. Verse 12, she does him good and not evil all her days. What does that suggest? She makes him happy, but she's also interested in all her days, the good times and the bad. She's pursuing his interest and what's best for him and for the family. Verse 23, her husband is known in the gates and when he sits among the elders in the land. What does that tell you about her? That seems to focus on him, but the point in the context is about her. What does that tell you? Verse 23. Yeah, she helps his reputation. She doesn't destroy his reputation. She enhances his reputation. She builds his interest up. She advances his cause and increases his influence. One of the ways she does that is she sees, according to this text, to the domestic affairs so he can go about his business. She leaves him without worries at home. Verse 23. Now, let's go further. And the next point is she's a diligent and a hard worker. We're going to subdivide that. So let's look at verses 13 and 14. Question number 2, point B. What do you see from verse 13? All right. She's not lazy. She's diligent. She works with her hands. All right, look at verse 13. She seeks wool and flax. She willingly works with her hands. Let's get verse 14 with that. And she is like a merchant ship. She brings food from afar. What do you learn from verse 13? All right, she looks for opportunities to work. Say again. All right, good point. She stays busy. Notice what she's doing here. She seeks wool and flax. She makes garments. She works hard, but she makes her material first before she makes her garments. She's industrious. Good point. Yeah. She's making her material first, and then she's making her garment. So she's not afraid of work at all. Not at all. She's educated. She's not lazy. She wants to work. She's not complaining. She's not forced. So she works with her hands. She's diligent. Let's get verse 15. She's obviously not lazy. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household. So what do you learn from verse 15? Question number 2.C. She takes care of her family. She rises early to prepare meals. She gets busy, gets her maidens busy, working hard. What else do you learn? Yeah. Manages her time well. She rises early to get her task and her work done. She works early and she works late. Notice verse 15, she rises early while it is yet night, provides food and a portion for her handmaidens. Look at verse 18 now. Verse 18, she perceives that her merchandise is good and her lamp does not go out by night. I'm interested in the last phrase. Well, let's get the first phrase first. She perceives that her merchandise is good. She's not just interested in working and making and doing and providing. She's interested in quality. Do you see that? She sees that her merchandise is good. She's trying to do her best in what she makes, what she cooks, what she performs, what she may sell. We'll see that in a moment. But look at the end of verse 18. Her lamp does not go out by night. She's burning the candle at both ends. She rises early and she's up late at night. And so she's up before it's daylight almost, and then she's working and having to burn the candle at the end of the day. Verse 27, connected with that, she watches over the way of her household and she does not eat the bread of idleness. What do you learn? Yeah, obviously not lazy. She's interested in the household affairs. She's watching after her husband. She's watching after her children. She's providing for the family. She's doing all that she can. And she indeed is not lazy at all. Next point, verse 19. She makes things for her family. Go back to verse 19. She stretches out her hand to the distaff. What is a distaff? It is a rod on which the wool is wound before spinning. So she's getting the wool, winding it on the distaff, and then she has to spin it, and she has to go through all the process before she ever makes her garment. In other words, she's not lazy. She's making preparation. She makes things for her family. Look at verse, let's see, what verse am I looking for? Verse 21 and 22, those two verses. She is not afraid of the snow for her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself, and her clothing is fine linen and purple. What do you learn from verse 21 and 22? Say again. Yes. She's prepared. She doesn't worry about her family. Are they going to be clothed? Do they have garments? Do they have coats for the winter? She's taking care of that. She's seeing that that's done. Verse 21. And then verse 22 suggests that the fine linen and purple means she's interested again in quality. She's trying to provide the best things for them, the best quality for them. She's not just trying to get by. She's a hard worker. Let's get verse 16 and 24, and that'll wrap that up, and we'll summarize that. 16, she considers a field and buys it, and from her profit she plants a vineyard. What do you learn from verse 16? Question 2D. She's not only working hard at home with the household affairs, she's got a business mind, and she's doing everything she can to help provide for the family. She works diligently. She's doing for the family. So she buys a field, and She makes profits and she plants her vineyard, so she's providing for her family, either for selling or providing things for her family within itself. Verse 24, she makes linen garments and she sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants. Not only is she making for her family, she's trying to make and sell things for her family that she might contribute to the income, whatever she can do. So she's got a business mind. She's got a mindset, I'm going to try to do everything I can for the family. Make sense? Far from a lazy woman. She willingly works with her hands. She works early. She works late. She makes things. She buys and she sells. She is very industrious. All right, next section. She takes care of herself for her family. Verse 17. Now this is interesting. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. What's that about?
Picture not awake, fainting violet, just waiting on people waiting on her, and so that she's built up her muscles, working hard and doing chores, and her hands are chapped and so on and so forth. She isn't just an ornament to her husband.
Good point. She's not, that's a good way of wording that, not just an ornament to her husband. It probably expresses the energy and the force with which she prepares herself for her work. I think it also implies she tries to take care of herself and to be strong and healthy so she can take care of her family. She keeps herself and as best she can to be the diligent worker. She takes care of herself, and she's doing that for her family. Questions or comments on verse 17? Verse 20. Now this is one of those connections we've made with the previous section. Do you see let's just stop and footnote here, that Lemuel's mother suggested you need to stay clear of women. Watch about being around women. She wasn't warning about being around a virtuous woman. She would not be the problem to him, but what she may be implying is this is the kind of woman that you need to have by your side. And she will also help you with caring about others. So let's look at verse 20. Question number 2F. What do you learn from verse 20? She extends her hand to the poor. She reaches out her hand to those who are needy. What do you learn? All right. Doesn't just care for herself and for her family. She deeply cares and is concerned about other people. She sees someone in need. She tries to take care of them. She should be able to do that because she can make things. She should be able to do that because she has a vineyard. She should be able to do that because she's buying and selling things. And so maybe she can sell something and take care of the poor. She reaches out her hand to the poor. She's a very caring person.
She's not reluctant, she's not lazy.
Not lazy, and she's not reluctant. All right. Verse 26. She speaks with kindness. Question number 2H. What do you learn from verse 26? All right. She doesn't just say what comes to her mind. She thinks. She's very wise. All right. She instructs her children in wisdom. So when she speaks, she is not this woman that's irritated all the time and she's hollering and complaining and fussing at her children and at her husband and complaining about everyone else. When she speaks, opens her mouth with wisdom. All right, that tells me 2 or 3 things. And then the second phrase is she speaks the law of kindness. It tells me, number 1, she thinks carefully before she speaks. In other words, she doesn't shout out to her husband without thinking and then has to recall that. Or the same thing to her children. She thinks carefully before she speaks. When she does speak, she utters wisdom. What does that tell you? All right, she does. She's going to listen to sources of wisdom. She's going to listen to the Word of God. She's going to be filled with wisdom. She spent time reading and searching Remember when you saw Grandma reading the scriptures and she was familiar with the scriptures and she could sit down and give you some good advice? This is the kind of woman this is. Go ahead.
It goes back to her telling him what kind of woman he wants. She may know what's better, but she don't want to say it. But she does teach it with kindness. It makes them think, well, maybe you're right.
All right, yeah. She speaks wisdom, but she speaks with kindness. So she can disseminate that wisdom to her husband, to her children, to others, and she does so it's regulated by love and with kindness. Any other questions or comments on that? All right. She is praised by many, verses 28 to 31. And here are 4 beings that praise her. So let's get verses 28. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. And then here is what her husband says. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. We hear that quoted often from a parent to a daughter, that many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Well, that's not a misuse of that, but the husband is saying to his wife that there are many daughters that I could have chosen, but you, because you are the virtuous woman, you are above them all. So, first thing is the children praise her. One commentator mentioned that often comes more in adulthood than it does in their youth. In other words, children may praise their mother, but they're not going to praise her like they will when they reach adulthood and realize what mom had done for them. Realize the sacrifice mom had made. Realize what mom had taught them. And so they rise up and they speak to mom and thank her for that. And her husband praises her. Now look at verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. I'll come back to verse 31. Let me go ahead and get verse 31. Her own works, give her of the fruit of her hands, and her own works will praise her in her gates. Now what I'm learning from that is her own works praise her. They give testimony to her. It's not the favor of men, it's not her beauty. And then ultimately, God will praise her. But I want to go back to verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. What does that tell you?
That's not all that matters.
All right, that's not all that matters. It runs out, yeah. A man that's looking for this knockout girl that's just a beauty queen, and that's what he wants, and he's not interested in anybody else, that beauty's going to fade in time. It's going to be gone. She's going to get older, and charm that she has may not always be there, but the beauty may not always be there. But a woman that fears God, that fear can always be there. Now, she may lose it, but if she truly fears God, it'll remain. Jared?
We have a saying in society now that women say, I'm a trophy wife. And this is talking exactly what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because of my looks, I'm going to get what I want.
Yeah.
And they go after the riches and that faith, and they take it and leave it.
Yeah. And it's gone. So had you rather have that woman that is that trophy wife, and then she loses that and she doesn't fear God, or the woman that fears God, regardless of how she looks, regardless of her charm? Charm is deceitful, beauty is fading, but the woman who fears God, she shall be praised. So I list last of all that this woman fears God. Verse 30 and verse 25, I think, implies that the term fear is not used. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. Strength and honor, that's what she's clothed with. It's not the garment she wears that makes her beautiful. It's the fear of God that makes her attractive. And so this is indeed the virtuous woman. Can you think of a parallel chapter that talks about the virtuous man? Yeah, Job 31, someone said. Excellent parallel. Questions or comments on this? Proverbs 31.
Is 10 through 31 acrostic in Hebrew?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I failed to mention that. Glad you brought that up. It is acrostic, alphabetic, and so we don't see that in the English, but in Hebrew you would have noticed that, as we see often in the Psalms, or several different Psalms, but it is in the Hebrew. Glad you mentioned that. All right, 2 weeks from today, the book of Jonah. Next week, Tim Stevens will be preaching for us.